website shortly. We won't be using the chat function today, so if you have any questions or comments, please post them using the Q&A. After each speaker, we will share as many questions and comments as we can, so please do use this function throughout the event. As you can see, we have a BSL signer. Her name's Monica, so thank you, Monica, for the duration of this event. So I would ask all of the speakers to bear this in mind and to try to speak as clearly as possible, but not slowly, just clearly. Now, the topic of this event is one that is close to my heart and one which has not always been given the space and time it clearly deserves. And when I came to write the title for this event, I couldn't help but focus on the prefix dis in particular. The prefix dis having multiple meanings, most of which are not particularly positive or certainly not uplifting. And on top of the many recognized challenges and barriers faced by anyone living with a disability, Black people with long-term chronic illnesses and disabilities, alongside their families, are additionally disenfranchised, disrespected, and discriminated against on account of their colour, ethnicity, cultural heritage, and cultural needs. Now, there's a lot of disses in the last sentence, and so I'll leave it to the following three speakers to elaborate further on how being young, gifted, and disabled can so easily be used to conceal and justify individual, institutional, and systemic experiences of racism. Our first speaker is Candy Singh, who will be interviewed by a member of our BME staff network, Fiona Secondino, about some of her lived experiences, challenges as a Black woman with a chronic illness and disability. Then we will have Professor Gus John, who will also talk about the challenges of Black children and young people with hidden disabilities in the education system. Followed by Sherelle Tayson, who will talk about her experience as a Black occupational therapist student, as well as the impact of existing health inequalities and possible interventions. Now, last but certainly not least, I have to acknowledge another member of the BME staff network, Kosa Hussain, who is providing very much needed and welcome technical and team support. And I know there's a few technical challenges already. So yes, hopefully we'll get that sorted. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my first speaker. Her name is Candy Singh. Candy Singh was born in Coventry and has grown up with a life-changing chronic illness and disability. She has a passion for social justice and has become increasingly more outspoken about some of her lived experiences and the realities of living with a disability whilst Black. Candy's medical condition is both visible and invisible at times, and throughout her life, she has experienced the intersectionality of her gender, ethnicity, and disability with a combination of direct and indirect racial prejudice, discrimination, and inequities. This is the first time that Candy has spoken publicly about her condition, and especially about some of the challenges she has faced and the many barriers she has come across. She is also the very proud mother of her 7-year-old daughter, Soraya. Candy will be asked a number of questions by Fiona Secondino. Please don't forget to put any comments and questions in the Q&A. So over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Candy. So if the audience can just bear with me a moment, I'm just going to start a presentation report to talk about for most of your life. So we really do appreciate you joining us today and sharing your story with us. And before we start, I also want to say that I know that you have told me that you've had many positive and supportive inspirational experiences and encounters over the years, but today is about the challenges, barriers, and discrimination that you faced. So we're going to talk about how the dis is real. On this slide, we have a picture of a badge saying, "I have a hidden disability," and the words, "and I am Black." So we're going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about some of your lived experiences and the impact of racism and racial inequalities and the intersectionality with being disabled and a woman. Okay, So Candy, if you're ready to go. The first question I'm going to ask you then is, can you briefly describe for us, talk to us a little bit about your chronic illness or disability? Tell us about what it's called and what your symptoms are and the support you get and the support that you need.
So I have a disability, it's called myasthenia gravis. It's a muscle weakness disease. It causes massive fatigue. So my symptoms are like my vision, I can't see. The muscles behind my eyes get very weak. The muscles in my mouth, so I can't speak. My speech is massively affected. I can't swallow at times because the muscles in my throat don't work. My diaphragm begins to stop working, which in turn causes massive breathing problems. It affects my muscles in my legs, my arms, so I can't lift, I can't walk, so sometimes I'm wheelchair bound. Yeah, and I do get treatment. So the treatment I get is steroids, which obviously have massive side effects, so weight gain being one of them. I get blood treatments like plasma exchange, IVIG, which is an intravenous medication, which lasts around 2 months, 3 months maximum. I've had a thymectomy, which is done by a cardiothoracic surgeon, a heart surgeon, because they have to move your heart to take away the gland. There's a gland right behind my heart that they've removed, which hasn't really had any effect. And I'm also part of a medical trial in Oxford, which at the moment is doing me a great deal of justice, because before this trial, I was in hospital every 2 to 3 weeks having blood transfusions for 2 weeks at a time. I'd have to stay in Oxford for 2 weeks. But since this medical trial, it's moved it to 3 months, roughly around that time. And I've got support with John Radcliffe Hospital. I have a specialist team over there, Dr. Lake, she's amazing. And yeah, I have carers. My family are really supportive. You know, I have my daughter who's, you know, helpful at times. So yeah, anything like repetitive makes me very ill. So like lifting my arms 10 times, for somebody else that might be very easy, but by the time I get to the 3rd time, my muscles stop responding, basically. The sun, for instance, makes me very weak, the heat. Also sunlight affects my vision, so I have to wear sunglasses because I can't see. My eyelids automatically start to close. I can't go on holiday without having support there, a carer, my mom, you know, my sister, because I need specialist treatment, and I can't be left alone, because something, if I was to get ill, it can just take 10 minutes, I can be fine, and then within 10 minutes I can massively deteriorate, I can stop breathing, I can't see, I can't speak, and obviously if I can't speak, I can't communicate with anybody to let them know what's wrong, so I always have to have somebody there on my behalf to speak for me. So yeah.
Wow, Candy, looking at this beautiful woman in front of me, you wouldn't know that you're going through all of this. So thank you very much for that, answering that question for me, Candy. I'm just about to stop sharing the screen, so there'll just be a slight delay for a moment while I change over. And then I'll ask you another question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So today's event then, it's about how your condition has affected you physically, but also your lived experience as a Black woman with a disability. And I understand that after years of symptoms, you were finally diagnosed at the age of 11. Can you give us some examples of how being Black with a disability has affected your childhood and your early teens?
Yeah, so childhood, nobody believed me. I was collapsing everywhere. My legs started to just give way. I remember one of the times was I had a PE lesson and everybody had to run, and everyone picked me last because by this time everyone could tell I started to put on weight because I wasn't active, and I was last picked to go on this team, and obviously my team lost, and because I was the loser, my punishment was to run 10 laps around a field, which obviously wasn't great. But again, I think people find these times I had like my muscles in my face didn't work, so I didn't respond very well. So people would think that I'm being moody or have an attitude. So even at 11, 10, 11 years old, people would just assume I have an attitude because I wasn't smiling, and things like that. But I didn't realize I couldn't smile. It wasn't me being rude. So, asking to use the disabled toilets, this is even after diagnosis. So using the disabled toilets was always a problem. I had a pass at school to use the toilets whenever I needed to. But I would still get grief from teachers because they would think that I'm just playing up, at school I was told, my mum got a phone call one time to say that I'd been in a fight and that I was being sent home. Again, I couldn't fight anyone with how weak I was. I had carers in school, people to hold my books for me and carry them to lessons. I had a taxi to and from school. I had a pass to leave school early and to leave class early so I could get to lessons without anyone knocking me, because obviously if somebody knocked me, I'd fall. So I was always being perceived as being aggressive. And I even got called into the head teacher's office one time. I'd gone to school in the morning and the head teacher had sent somebody to come and get me, and I had to bring my bags and whatnot. And I remember I had to climb 3 flights of stairs to get to him. And they searched me for drugs. And again, I'm a disabled Black girl, a teenager, and I got searched for drugs at that time. Another example, my dad had passed away. I was off school for 3 months. And the very same day that I'd gone back to school, I remember a boy thought it would be funny to make comments about my dad being dead. And I remember I just swiped everything off my table. I was really angry, I wasn't happy. And I left the classroom and I got excluded because of it. Even though he'd made the comments, I'm the one that got, punished for what he'd said. And I didn't hit him, I didn't do anything. I just left the classroom. So yeah, like I said, there's been a few things in school. Like I said about
And do you think, Candy, when they were making those judgment calls and those decisions, do you think it was to do with the fact that you were Black or?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing was in a history lesson, the boys thought it was funny to stack all the chairs on top of a teacher's desk. Obviously, everybody's laughing. It was funny. I got sent out and I had detention because of it. I had nothing to do with it. I physically wouldn't be able to lift any chairs and stack them on a table. All the teachers were aware of my disability. And again, I got punished. There was just constantly something going on and I was being blamed for it. And it was a case of being almost like being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So my mum was trying, I even got told one time that me and my Asian friends were all sitting on a bench and the head teacher came over to us and told us we look intimidating, so we're to separate. So again, like I said, I had friends that told me when we'd leave school, they'd have to walk away from me because their parents had told them not to hang around with me. So again, I think there's a lot of, I don't know if you want to call it indirect racism, but definitely because I'm Black, I definitely felt it at school.
Yeah, it's as if your disability was completely invisible.
Yes, and
the
it was almost like
thing they saw is a Black girl.
Yes, and I was kind of like, I was made out to be a bully and things like that. Anybody who knows me knows that's not in my nature. But because of the colour of my skin, I was always, everyone had their own, vision kind of thing, a stereotype. I was definitely stereotyped as soon as somebody would see me. So
that sort of leads me on to my next question in a way. So how would you define your own identity, and how do you think other people would define or describe you? You've talked about people describing you as aggressive and various things, but what do you think your identity is, and how do you think other people saw you?
I would describe myself as a Black woman of mixed heritage. I'm a mother, sister, I'm a daughter. I'm very family orientated and I have a long-term disability, and I would put them in order.
Yeah.
Definitely that people would notice that I'm Black before they see anything else. I've come to accept my condition and all the problems that come with it. I would say, like I said, I'm a kind, caring person. And I've learned that there's lots of good people in the world too. You know, it's not just the bad. There's a lot of good people out there. Strangers, you know, definitely strangers, like I said, would definitely notice my colour of my skin. They could see me in a wheelchair, that's not a problem, but they would definitely just look, oh, you know, Black woman, straight away. Yeah. So yeah.
And you mentioned that you've learned to accept your disability over the years, but have your views over your identity changed over the years as well as a result?
Yeah, I think when I was younger, I probably didn't notice things as much when I was younger. I definitely say as I've got older, I've definitely started to see how other people see me. Even, like I said, when we go back to the school, I thought it was quite funny, probably at the time, that nobody's parents wanted, I didn't understand, but I thought it was quite funny that people's parents didn't want me to be with their child, you know, and talk to them and things like that, and they'd have to hide it, and it was a big secret, and I would go along with it just so they wouldn't get in trouble. So yeah.
So if you were in that situation now, what would be different? Would you change the way you were?
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. Yes. Yes. It took me a long time to get here. A long time. My mum would be proud, but like I said, it's took me a long time. Like I said, to me it's very difficult in general to talk about my disability. I don't like to discuss it because I don't want people to just see this disabled person. You know, it's almost like a negative thing, and it's the same with being Black. It's people just see a negative thing, and it's so definitely my views have changed.
Okay, so I know you've mentioned you've had a lot of positive and rewarding experiences with medical professionals, especially in the recent years, and you named your consultant earlier on. So can you share with us some examples of the sorts of challenges and barriers that you faced when interacting with medical professionals or support staff, or in hospitals in general, for example? Because I imagine your life has been spent in hospital.
Yes. So I've had a lot of experiences, and I would say there's a lot of bad ones. There's a couple that stick out in my head. So one of them was I'd got a sickness bug, and if I get sick, if I get a flu, anything, it wipes me out. I can't move. I become bedridden. I require a lot of help and assistance. And I had this sickness bug, and I was vomiting. And I said, my mum called an ambulance. The ambulance came. For the first time in 20 odd years, I'd said to my mum, don't come to the hospital. You stay here with my daughter. I'll be fine. I just need some anti-sickness and I'll be fine. So I go to the hospital, and they gave me an intravenous drug straight away. And within, I'd say 60 seconds, a minute, my arms stopped moving. My legs wouldn't move. I felt my diaphragm becoming more weak, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I couldn't see anybody. So I'm saying to this nurse, get it out my arm. But I know she probably couldn't understand me fully because, like I said, my speech was affected. But I'm flailing around in the bed because I'm panicking, and I know I need to get this drug out my arm because it's doing something to me that it shouldn't be. And she's there telling me to calm down, that I'm overreacting. It was bad. And I had a couple of police officers that have walked past my room that I was in A&E, and they just ignored me. I was screaming for help at this point because I was so scared that I was going to die. And eventually a doctor walked past my room and seen that I was distressed, came in straight away, took it out of my arm. And, at that point, my heart rate was at 167 beats. It was beating really fast. There's machines going crazy. And like I said, this nurse had disappeared by this time because obviously she'd ignored me for a good minute or so. Like I said, I'm screaming for help. I'm begging her to take this out my arm. And like I said, her response was, again, I'm being aggressive. That's how she felt. But I felt like she was being aggressive in the end. It wasn't me. I'm just trying to, stay alive at this point. So that was a very, very scary point in my life. I've had a secretary with one of my consultants who I found that if I'd phone up for treatment, because that's what I'd have to do. I'd get weak and I'd get ill, and then they'd expect me to phone them and let them know. But she would diagnose me over the phone. A secretary who's not medically trained would diagnose me over the phone, refuse to pass on messages. I have a lot of anxiety, so I don't always speak up for myself. I rely on my mum a lot to speak for me. So my mum would eventually get involved, and again, my mum would come across as the black aggressor, and it was a lot of like refusing to treat me sometimes. I gave birth, and normally what they do when you give birth with my condition is they give you a blood transfusion instantly as soon as you've given birth. It's the first thing they do. My consultant refused to give me the blood transfusion for a year and a half. I couldn't pick up my child. I couldn't see, I couldn't drive, I couldn't do anything. There was absolutely nothing. And again, I believe it was down to the fact that he found me and my mum aggressive. They mistook our, just being assertive for aggression. I've dealt with this condition for a very long time, like 20 odd years. And still being questioned, and secretaries refusing to pass on messages, and we'd tell him, we told your secretary, she hasn't told you. And he was so protective of his secretary. We would still be dismissed. So my mum would also have to be very careful about what she said, because it could affect my future treatment, and that's what she was worried about. So it was very difficult. My mum, like I said, she's very professional. She's assertive, but like I said, often mistaken for aggressive.
So Candy, so what do you think the nurses, the doctors, all the other people could do to actually improve your experience as a Black person with a disability? What could they do
to improve? Well, I think training, getting some more staff, employing more Black people would definitely help, because again, another problem I have when I go into hospital is my hair. I have I have English people. I know I don't have like fully Black hair, but my hair's very thick, it's very curly, and they will just brush from from the root down to the ground. And
Ouch.
Yes. So that was these things are problem. Even hygiene, going to have a shower, and understand that we cream from head to toe, not just our hands, things like that. Food, very bland food. So I believe there's quite a few things they could do. Like I said, employ a few more Black staff, get some training.
And what sort of advice would you give them as somebody who suffered in the way that you have? What sort of advice would you give them to help them do their job better?
Just listen. Try and be a bit more understanding. Don't dismiss what we're saying. I'm not mentally unstable. I'm still an adult, and I feel like sometimes I get treated like I'm a child, and it gets frustrating at times, as you can imagine, when you know what you're talking about, and somebody's telling you that you don't. I live this every single day of my life. So just listen, and like I said, be more understanding. Definitely.
Oh, thank you, Candy.
Okay.
If only they had as much empathy as you do. We've literally got a minute left in terms of the Q&A, my asking questions of you. Is there anything else you would like to add or say for this moment before we move over to the Q&A?
No, that's fine. I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'll do then for you, Candy, is I'll move over to the Q&A, and then if we have more extra time, I'll go back to some of the other questions that I might have.
Okay.
So we have a question from Cheryl. Now, she's asked you, Candy, how many people do you know that have this condition, and are you part of a support group, and have you had occupational therapy support? I can repeat the questions.
Okay, thank you. So I've met a couple of people. I've never met anybody that is Black with my condition, but I do have one very, very good friend that has myasthenia that I've only met 2 years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, and we stay in contact. But like I said, you know, if I give you an example, I've been in, if you think there's 52 weeks in a year, the year before the pandemic, I've been to A&E 46 times. So, and even in that time, I'm still not meeting people with myasthenia. It's a very, very rare condition. I couldn't give you the statistics on it, on how many people have it, but I know it's very rare. So yeah, is there anything else?
So yeah, so are you part of a support group for this condition?
Yes, MyAware, they are a great support group. I get to speak to people that are local. You know, like I said, there's different types of myasthenia. Some of them only have ocular, which only affects your eyes, which causes vision problems and droopy eyelids, and whatnot. But yeah, there's a support group that I've joined, which is really good.
Yeah, MyAware are very a needy charity. So you know, do contribute and support them in any way you can.
Definitely.
They're very grateful for all
and
the
they're
support
very good at what they do. I mean, they're one of the support groups that have managed to get us free prescriptions. I take up to 30 tablets a day, and I think they're probably about 10 different tablets. So the fact that I get free prescriptions is, you know, they're a very good charity, good at what they do, even though they don't have that massive support, because not a lot of people know myasthenia exists. A lot of people are fully aware that there's illnesses such as multiple sclerosis, for instance, you know. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people, if you can, support the cause, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Candy. And the final question in that set from Sherilyn was, have you had occupational therapy support?
Yes, I've had occupational therapy report. At one point, they'd sent me to swimming lessons to try and encourage my muscles to become stronger. But we worked out that the heat, the pool, the swimming, not realizing how much activity I'm doing, was actually making me more sick. But I have aids and adaptations at home through occupational therapy. Like I said, they're a really good support, occupational therapy. I've even managed to get a bungalow, currently going to move. So I don't have any stairs, because I have a stair lift at the moment because I can't do stairs. But yeah, I've had support from occupational therapy, and they're great.
Yeah, it's great that you've had that support.
Yeah.
Sherilyn is very, very astonished by what she's heard from you so far, and she's keen to understand what your coping mechanism has been throughout.
Oh wow, my mom, my sister, my brother, and my child, they are the reason that I'm still alive, that I keep going, that I keep smiling. There's nothing they wouldn't do for me. I can phone them at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, mentally it's very difficult at times. But like I said, without them, I don't think I'd be the person I am today. I wouldn't have the strength that I have. Like I said, they're always very positive, and they don't ever make me feel like I ask too much. If anything, I don't ask enough, kind of thing. You know, it's nice being waited on hand and foot.
especially as you get older.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, they've been a great support. My family, my cousins, everybody, my family are so understanding. And I think one reason that I got it so young, like I said, I had symptoms from the age of around 8 or 9. Well, 4, my mum says, but I remember from around 8 or 9 having symptoms. So if you think all my family have lived with it, I'm 33 now, you know, do the math. They've learned to live with it. It's almost like my mom, my sister, and my brother, it's like they have myasthenia themselves. You know, they can describe it to a T. They understand. I don't have to explain, you know, what's wrong. They can tell straight away. So even now, I'm sure my mom's telling me to stop talking before you make yourself ill.
So the next question was actually around how long it took for you to be diagnosed, which you've partially answered. So I'll take this opportunity just to mention to the audience, because the audience may not be aware that actually Annette Hay, who's organised this event and is the chair of this event, is actually Candy's mum.
Yes.
So she is the person who's probably in the background telling Candy to slow down and not speak so much. But
yes.
So I mean, so you say yes. So you say you remember the symptoms from when you were 8, but obviously your mum picked up signs that something was wrong earlier than that. Yeah,
she'd taken me to the doctors at 4 years old because I was complaining of leg pain. I always wanted to be carried. I'd have to be put in a trolley. I was falling asleep because, again, it's fatigue. It makes me so tired. You know, something as simple as just having a shower, I'm absolutely wiped out after that, even with help. So I need sleep. So I sleep probably, I can have a 4 or 5 hour nap in the day easily, and I can still be tired 2 hours after I've woke up. So all these things, I was falling asleep in random places. In school, in primary school, I had nap time, things like that. So yeah, my mum had picked up symptoms from 4, but like I said, I remember things from around 8 years old. I remember when it get close to doing PE, I'd go to the canteen, I'd eat my lunch, I'd run to the toilets and I spit it all over my chest to make it look like I'd been sick, so I didn't have to go to PE, because nobody at this time believed me that I was ill. They didn't know what was wrong with me. They were trying to send me to psychologists because they thought there was something mentally wrong with me rather than physically. So yeah, I used to try and make myself sick and stuff like that. But
yeah, it must have been awful and frustrating.
Yeah,
Especially because I expect that Annette, as your mum, would have, mums tend to have this instinct that something's not right. And
yes,
this is just not, and
well,
having
definitely,
to
she'd
push.
taken me. Yeah, she'd taken me to the doctors, and she was like, "There's something not right. You need to, come on." Like I said, we've met a lot of rude doctors in our time. Someone that told me that I was just overweight and that she needed to put me on a diet. And they said it in front of me. I remember my mum told me to leave the room. I don't remember much after that. I don't know what was said in there, but I'm sure she'd put that doctor in their place. Like I said, my protective mother.
Yes, you're lucky to have her.
Definitely.
Okay, so we're running low on time, and the questions are coming in thick and fast. But I should just do a shout out here, because Sarah Hindley on the call has thanked you for sharing her story, because actually Sarah is from My Aware and the charity. She shared the website www.myaware.org if anyone wants to find out more about myasthenia. And there's actually an estimated 12,000 people with myasthenia in the UK. And research is currently being undertaken right now to get some more concrete figures. So we've got 3 minutes left. I think going back to the question about how we train healthcare staff and teachers, Musharat has asked, it was basically put to you, how can we train healthcare staff and teachers differently to embed that cultural humility? Because what has been done so far is not working. Mushrat says that I know that we should be asking healthcare staff and teachers to come up with solutions, as they have created the conditions of ignorance and hostility. So do you think there's a different way of training healthcare staff to make it, impactful, do you think?
I'm not sure. Like I said, the healthcare staff, like I said, you get, like I said, the only thing I can think of is, I know it must be very difficult if you're not walking in as a Black woman, to put yourself into a Black person's shoes, so I do understand that. But again, I think just employing more Black people, maybe, just mixing people with, like I said, there's not a great mixture of different ethnicities. I'm really not sure what the answer is to this, because I feel like no matter what we do, there will always be racism. It will always exist, whether it's direct or indirect. And some people are just really ignorant and don't realize what they're doing. Like I said, nurses, like I said, I get patients that don't want to speak to me because of the color of my skin. They find me intimidating before I've even said anything. And like I said, I'm a very bubbly person, I like to think. But I'm not sure what they can do, to be honest.
Yeah, so I think what you said there, I think there resonates a little bit in terms of it's the conversations, isn't it? You said it's ignorance that's feeding most of this.
So just take the time to get to know someone, speak to them before you make judgment. Yes, definitely.
Absolutely, share and don't be afraid to have those conversations. You, Candy, clearly are not. No. You're very vocal. You'll tell them, but anybody else who is suffering in the same way, who might be a little bit anxious about doing that, just by sharing how they're feeling, what's going on with the practitioners, will help the practitioners understand the nature of the condition and how it varies with different people.
And don't get offended, because there's no need to be offended. I feel like people get offended very quickly when it comes to talking about racism, inequality and things like that. People are too quick to, like I said, just get offended. There's no need. You can have a grown conversation without getting on the defense.
Well, thank you so much. We are
You're
actually
welcome.
out of time at the moment, Candy. There are a few more questions. So what I might try to do is share them with you behind the scenes and see if you can answer, type some responses to the individuals who's posed those questions later on. But thank you so much for sharing your experience. I mean, it's both been scary, enlightening and motivating all at the same time.
Yes.
And I know, because I know you and I know your mother, how this is a big thing for you. You don't normally speak openly. This is probably the first time you're speaking out. And
it's been a very I'm very, very withdrawn about my condition. I don't like to tell people what's wrong with me. I'm scared I'll be judged and whatnot. So this is the very first time I've spoken to anybody who'd done anything like this. Hopefully not the last.
I hope so too, Candy. And I know that there'll be plenty of people out there who would love to hear you speak much more. And you've already, in this short space of time, I think you've already done so much already.
Thank you.
And so do keep on speaking. And thank you so much,
very
Candy.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Fiona and Candy. Yeah, so as everybody knows now, so that is my daughter. I've got 3 children. That is my middle child. And yeah, I'm very proud of you, Candy. Well done. And who would know that you could have carried on talking for that long? Actually, we needed to tell you to stop. Yeah, because I know you're very nervous about that. So well done. So yeah, very happy and very proud of you. So join us later on in the panel. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to quickly go on to and thank you, Fiona, for facilitating that. Our next speaker is none other than our esteemed and most valued elder activist, Professor Gus John. As many of you will know by now, Professor Gus John is a scholar activist who has done notable work in the fields of education policy, the role of schooling and education in promoting social justice, school improvement, management, and international development. Since the 60s, he's been active in issues of education and schooling in Britain's inner cities. Professor Gus John has been an Associate Professor of Education and Honorary Fellow of the London Centre for Leadership in Learning at the UCL Institute of Education, and from 2016, Visiting Professor at Coventry University, where he works with the Vice-Chancellor and University Leadership Team in improving the strategic management of the university and building a culture of equity. So, like I said, without further ado, I'm going to let Gus go on and yeah, continue the rest of the programme. Thank you, Gus.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you very much, Candy. That was very illuminating, and there's so much of it I want to comment upon. What I want to do in this presentation is to place all of that into a wider context of disability discrimination generally, not just in relation to Black people, but to say, particularly in respect of your condition, that for the last 40 years or so, I've been involved with others in growing awareness of sickle cell anemia and the impact that has on Black people, Black children, Black students, and so on. And here again is another situation, another medical condition that triggers all sorts of racisms, with people bringing their prejudices and whatever baggage they have in relation to Black people to their encounter with sickle cell sufferers and coming to conclusions about their condition, their reaction to their condition, and what should and what should not happen to them. So let me say then that I want to make some observations which hopefully in this company no one will find contentious. I've been involved in education all my life. As a student, as a parent, teacher, education administrator, including being for 8 years a director of education, as an activist, as an academic, as a writer. In all of those capacities, my work has been molded and underpinned by certain values and beliefs, and I want to share a few of those beliefs. I believe in the dignity and worth of every human being. I believe that all human beings have human rights, and we should be committed to upholding those rights in all dealings with our fellow citizens. I believe that everyone has a right to live. Everyone has a right to live with respect and dignity, irrespective of their defining characteristics. That everyone has a right to work, study, and enjoy their leisure in an environment in which that right is respected. I believe that respect for oneself and for others grows by giving it practical expression in all aspects of daily living. And that means I should confront exclusion and other forms of oppression on the grounds of disability, race, gender, class, sexual orientation, age, faith, and religion, where people live, how they live their lives, how they look, how they dress, or their educational attainment. I believe that I should safeguard the weak and defenseless in society from exploitation as a matter of moral duty and civic responsibility, and not least as a defense against barbarism. I believe that I must take responsibility for ensuring that I do not make people suffer or deny them their rights on account of any of the above grounds. It is a fundamental human right to be able to go about my lawful business anywhere in this country or anywhere without fear of being attacked for not belonging to that place or to any group in that place. Above all, I believe that combating inequality and discrimination is part of the practice, the process of building a human rights culture, a culture that upholds respect for the dignity and worth of every person. In essence, all or at least some of the above provide the rationale for the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975, the Race Relations Act of 1976, and the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995, all now rolled into the Equality Act of 2010, for better or for worse. All those three pieces of legislation came about not because the government of the day was spellbound by a vision of equality and social justice. I don't know that there is a government in this country that has ever had such a vision. They came about as a result of decades, if not centuries, of struggle by those same historically oppressed groups. Struggles against the hegemony and homogeneity of normal, and against the power and ideology of those doing the oppressing. Males, typically white males, ruling elites, the church, the state and its institutions, including the predominantly working class police. All of those appropriated to themselves the right to determine who was deserving of basic necessities and who was not, who was allowed to be seen in so-called decent company and who was not, who could be tolerated in public-facing jobs, and who should be kept out of sight. I well recall as a young man in this country looking for work, those who wish to discriminate against Black workers would say, we don't mind having them work here, but our customers won't like it. One early experience I had in this country, beginning of the 1970s, I was doing some medical social research in Scotland, of all places, Perthshire, doing work on the disability, the discriminations faced by people with port wine birthmarks. And on that particular occasion, I'm working with the mother and a teenage girl, aged about 17, who had a very large port wine birthmark down one side of her face. And a woman comes into the cafe where we were sitting having this conversation, looks thunderously at the mother and the girl, ordered something, and while waiting for her food or coffee or whatever it is to be served, comes over and says to the mother, "How dare you bring such a grotesque creature into a place where people are eating?" The girl froze and then got up and darted out of the cafe, straight into the path of a coming car, and got knocked down. Horrible scene. The woman who had made the remark felt no compunction whatsoever. As far as she was concerned, she was glad that the girl was no longer in the cafe. The fact that she was being taken to hospital and no one knew whether she was going to live didn't seem to concern her one bit. This is why it makes no sense to focus narrowly on individual prejudice and bias, implicit and unconscious or otherwise, but to focus on structural, cultural, individual, as well as personal manifestations of disability discrimination and oppression, gender discrimination and oppression, race discrimination and oppression, etc. Because it is where a culture exists that encourages such personal behaviors and legitimizes them, that one begins to see the impact of racism and disability discrimination on those who suffer from it. There are ingrained attitudes in society which both feed off and buttress a culture of disability oppression, racial oppression, gender subordination, and the rest. That culture shapes people's beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors, including attitudes about which groups in the population are dispensable and should be sacrificed first if push comes to shove. Clearly, there is historical evidence of that over centuries, from African enslavement, genocide, and the elimination of 200 million Africans and indigenous peoples across the globe, to the industrial extermination of 6 million Jews, which we all know about. But there is also contemporaneous evidence of it in the way nation states, especially in the so-called developed world, have chosen to deal with the COVID pandemic. And that explains the abundance of these do not resuscitate notices that were put on the beds of people from elderly care homes or people who were just elderly during this COVID pandemic. The term which has been used already in this conversation, intersectionality, gets used a lot. In the context of this discussion, though, it is worth concentrating on what might be called compounded vulnerability and opportunistic abuse of power and privilege, even by folk who themselves belong to an historically oppressed group. Sexual predators of any ethnicity preying rapaciously upon the vulnerability of women and men with learning disabilities is a classic case in point. Similarly, street robbers targeting the elderly and infirm or the physically disabled, or bullies in schools seeing children with varying degrees of disability as obvious targets of abuse just for fun, or just to show that they could cowardly intimidate, harass, and ruin the mental health of those they see as defenseless. It is for all of those reasons that it is essential, in my view, that society seeks to build a human rights culture, and that schools are seen as having a major role in embedding that culture and socializing children within it. One of the things I was doing in Scotland in the early 70s was trying to get local education authorities to understand that whether it be in relation to port-mine birthmarks or any other physical disabilities, never mind hidden ones, they had a societal duty. Schools and other educational institutions had a societal duty to educate and socialize and inform children about disability and disability discrimination and how they become implicated in that. Because being implicated in it means denying the human rights of those with disabilities. That's why I believe there is an increasingly urgent need for schools to operate within a rights context, having regard to the duties placed upon them by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and other legislation and statutory guidance. Inclusive education, then, should not be seen as the preoccupation of disability rights activists. So, operating in a culture informed by the principles that I have just adumbrated requires that teachers be provided with the space, the time, and the resources to provide that support to all children, not just those with disabilities, and to talk with children so that talking, active listening without being judgmental, giving children the permission to open up and to share even their prejudices, are essential elements of pedagogy and of aiding children's personal as well as academic development. It seems to me that it is utterly insane that, as the government's own statistics suggest, schools are excluding larger numbers of children with special educational needs and disabilities year on year, even though many of those children have education, health, and care plans, formerly statements of special educational need, as a result of formal assessment of their needs. Yet, the government not only encourages schools to operate zero tolerance policies as a way of controlling disruptive behavior, but severely limits the resources available to local authorities to fund provision for children with complex needs that invariably trigger the behaviors that lead to exclusion. The Alliance for Inclusive Education, ALFI, with which the charity that I chair and founded in 1999 works, the Communities Empowerment Network, and we do work principally around school exclusion. ALFI states that sometimes the child's behavior may not be a trigger, but it's a form of behavior that allows them to be just be in their environment. And all the things that Candy was saying about her experiences are experienced by children and indeed by their parents, children who are ADHD sufferers or children with autism and so on. Such behaviors are construed as being disrupted by neurotypical population without any apparent good reason. For many children with SEN, such behaviors and their coping strategies that enable them to participate in lessons or prevent them from doing something more harmful are precisely the ones that get them excluded. However, An inclusive school would embrace children's strategies even if they do not conform to the social norms that do not reflect the diversity of behaviors prevalent in any population. The idea that any school could sensibly operate a zero tolerance policy is frankly absurd. It is bordering on legitimized structural oppression to have zero tolerance policies which have no regard whatsoever to the specificities of children's conditions or whatever ailments they may have or conditions they might be suffering from. For many children with autism, such behaviors help them cope with a school system that clearly has not embraced the benefits of neurodiversity. And of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 24, Alfie says that the UK government has a duty to promote inclusive education practice under that particular act. Obligations around disabled people's human rights to education. The government says it is committed to continuing to develop an inclusive system where parents of disabled children have increasing access to mainstream schools and staff, which have the capacity to meet the needs of disabled children and where exclusions would not be needed or even lawful. That remains an aspiration, and there are no signs that the government is working towards it. Mainstream schools would be required to work with disabled children with challenging behaviors and to seek solutions that do not result in the stigmatization and demoralization of disabled children and their families that occurs after exclusion. My organization, CEN, believes that school exclusion of any child with disabilities or not is wasteful, it is destructive, and it is discriminatory. Alfie believes that disabled and non-disabled pupils and students learning together creates opportunities to build relationships and create a diverse and inclusive society that welcomes everyone. It uses the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as its framework for change. And that convention states that a fully inclusive education system requires the ending of segregated special schools, segregated units, hubs, and classrooms. I just want to take us now to some statistics in relation to all of this. Children with special educational needs and disabilities are excluded for all sorts of behavior related to their impairments and health conditions. And it seems to me to be wrong beyond belief that if a child is assessed as having autism or ADHD, and you are making provision for that child, that you would want to exclude that child because of the behavior when you know that those conditions give rise to particular behaviors in those children. But schools do that anyway. And according to the Department for Education's own statistics, and I'm using 2017 statistics, pupils with SEN or SEND are at a substantially higher risk than other groups of pupils of experiencing exclusion. Their statistics, as reported, say the following. Pupils with identified special educational needs accounted for almost half of all permanent exclusions and fixed period exclusions. Pupils with SEND support had the highest permanent exclusion rate and were almost 7 times more likely to receive a permanent exclusion than pupils with no special educational needs. Pupils with an education, health, and care plan or with a statement of SEN had the highest fixed period exclusion rate and were almost 6 times more likely to receive a fixed period exclusion than pupils with no special educational needs. Children with identified SEN accounted for almost half of all permanent and fixed period exclusions. Children with SEN support, that is, those who have SEN or are disabled but don't have an education, health, and care plan, were almost 7 times more likely to receive a permanent exclusion than children with no special educational needs. Now, it seems to me that, ma'am, I mean, I don't know about you, but I consider it to be utterly repressive, not just illogical, repressive for children who have special educational needs and disabilities to be experiencing those kinds of school regimes, and for the government to be sanctioning schools to exclude children at that kind of level. In conclusion, let me say it is not at all surprising that both with regard to the racial disparities that all of this highlights, and amongst those levels of exclusion I talked about, are large numbers of Black children, children who are looked after, in other words, children in care, and children whose parents themselves have got either learning disabilities or are in need of some forms of mental support. There is ample evidence of a correlation between these statistics and the austerity imposed by the government since Cameron, Clegg, and Osborne in 2010. Very little connection is made between poverty and its impact upon the most vulnerable children in society, as well as the fact that whether it is through police in the community, or pupils and zero tolerance in schools, or police and zero tolerance in schools, the government appears to believe it could solve the crisis we are in, the crisis in schooling and education, the economic crisis in the country, the social order crisis in the country, by imposing more and more punitive regimes. So finally, to return to where I started, that is why we need a robust focus on human rights, and especially a movement to ensure that government is held to account for lack of compliance with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and held to account for ruining the life chances of increasing numbers of children of any ethnicity, children and young people with disabilities. So I want to thank Candy again for sharing so openly her own situation from the age of 4 or the age of 8 and 9, when she became aware of the impact of that condition on her and everything that she's been through since. And I thank Annette and Corsa and Fiona and the others of them for organizing this very important event.
Okay, thank you so much, Gus. And yeah, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that we're kind of running over time, so apologies. I just want to remind anybody, if you've got any more questions, please put them in the Q&A, but we have one here. Is it a question or a comment? So this is from Mushrat, which says, my speech and language therapist friend is coming up with more and more hostility by schools to providing the necessary therapy and educational supports due to investment. She finds more and more they are performing injustice on Black neurodiverse and ADHD plus children, more so boys. So for example, excluding the child from school.
Yes.
Recently, one school took to attacking her professionalism and character to discredit her report of the needs for a child? How do we collectively disrupt this legitimization of oppression and racism in schools under the guise of exclusion practices or funding? It is urgent.
Okay, let me try and be brief with my answer. I think we do so by mobilizing parents, by equipping parents with knowledge about these processes, knowledge of the guidance that schools are supposed to be applying when they exclude students, and generally demanding that the government itself provides the guidance and the resources to schools to be able to meet children's needs, irrespective of however complex those needs are. We can't, on the one hand, argue that every child matters and every child has an entitlement to education, and then seek to sift them according to the extent to which they are able to conform with our behavior policies or our uniform policies or whatever else. If I don't send my child, well, my grandchild to school, I am likely to be put in jail as the parent who has responsibility for her. And that happens across the country. There are parents who get put to jail for not making sure that their children attend school. So how could the law, on the one hand, operate in that manner, and then on the other hand, give schools license to exclude students hand over fist, and then placing the responsibility on the parents to make sure that, having excluded them, the parents find purposeful things for them to do, irrespective of the fact that they work, irrespective of the fact that they've got many jobs, irrespective of the fact that if they take time off work, they're likely to lose their job. The whole thing is ass about face. And it's about time that we abandon this notion that what we are called upon to do is to deal with our individual child, get the best school, the school that's assessed as outstanding by Ofsted, and then the devil can take the hindmost. I mean, that neoliberal, neoliberal, individualistic, anti-collective and anti-rights education system that we're running at the minute has got to go. But it is by collectivizing ourselves as parents and as students that we make the government understand that they're not doing this in our name, and we are not about the business, all of us, of finding private solutions to public ills by securing decent places for our children and forgetting about what's happening to other children.
Okay, thank you, Gus. I've just got one or two other questions, and I'm just going to say now that I'm hoping, including you, Monica, that people will, perhaps stay an extra 10 minutes or so that we get to a chance to hear Sherelle and ask her a couple of questions. So the next question, Gus, on here is, how do you think we might best hold the government to account?
Well, I mean, I think there has to be a number of ways of doing that. I think all people involved as stakeholders, I hate the word, but you know what I mean, in the schooling system have got to be part of this. As I said, students organizing themselves independently of teachers and of their parents, parents organizing themselves independently of teachers. Teachers are already organized. They've got their teaching unions and God knows what else, and black sections within teaching unions and so on. The only people who are not organized, but who are impacted most by all of that, are parents and students. So I want to see, I want to have the resources, I have the energy. I want to have the resources to build a national movement of school students. A national movement of parents, so that every primary school, every secondary school has a parents' movement concerned about what's going on in the school and can hold the school itself, the local authority, the multi-academy trust, and the government to account. It is through those democratic processes that we demonstrate that our exercise of democratic citizenship is not just about putting an X near somebody's name once every 4 years and hoping that they won't screw us to the wall when they get elected. It's not about that. So I'm talking now about students' power, parents' power, and using our skills and abilities and all the forums we have, including my charity, to put pressure on the government to change the direction of schooling and education in this country. It is oppressive. The casualties are huge, particularly amongst Black young people, young offender institutions, pupil referral units, adult prisons. We can't continue like this.
Okay, thank you, Gus. There is another question, but I'm going to hold that question till the end because I think it kind of can relate to all of them. I'll ask you to answer this after Sherelle's presentation. So Sherelle, thank you very much, Gus. We're going to come back to you at the end. I really appreciate it. So Sherelle, I'm just going to introduce you now. So Sherelle Tayson, whoops, let's get her on camera first. There you are. So Sherelle Tayson is Black British and of Ghanaian heritage. Sherelle's pronouns are she and her. Sherelle is currently a final year postgraduate occupational therapy student at London South Bank University, LSBU to some of you. Sherelle sees herself to be an occupational therapy activist involved in promoting anti-racism changes within the profession. Sherelle has generated and participated in knowledge sharing through podcasts and presentations, local and nationally. Sherelle is a huge believer that the time is right now to meaningfully, as a collective of peers and allies, to disrupt the status quo of racial inequity in health and social care. Welcome, Sherelle, and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Annette. Yep, can I get it on full screen, please?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's just coming up on now.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. First of all, I just want to thank Annette for this opportunity to be a part of such a powerful event and sharing this platform with great people, such as the living legend himself, Professor Gus John, and the brave Candy Singh. In my title, I have used the word musings because this is my informal reflections on the topic. Next slide, please. So it was difficult to find any current data on the NHS and disabled people, but I managed to come across the national data from 2008, which highlights that 59% disabled people who answered the survey described that they had a good life, but were less satisfied with their life compared to people who weren't disabled. This survey included disabled people from BME populations and also from lower income populations. The highest level of dissatisfaction were amongst younger disabled people living alone and disabled people with mental health problems. When it came to the NHS, 94% said they were treated with dignity, and 88% felt like staff were knowledgeable about their condition. 48% felt there were barriers to accessibility of services. This is the data for BME disabled persons in relation to healthcare, but this is also overlaid with long-standing existing health disparities. Black people are 4 times likely to die of COVID-19 compared to their white peers, and the deaths of disabled people within the UK have gone up by 134% during the pandemic, identified in a news article in The Independent 2020. Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. This is from the British Medical Journal article 2021. The BME public are less likely to receive prompt pain management because of the falsely held belief that they have a higher threshold of pain tolerance, or because they are less vocal. And that's from the Association of American Medical College 2020. The Public Health England report 2020 on health disparities and COVID-19 does not specifically have data on people with disabilities, but does indicate that socially excluded or people with multiple and complex needs, including mental and physical health, that there is strong evidence that these populations are at extreme risk during pandemic events. Disability Rights UK's Chief Executive, Cameron Malik, pointed out in 2020 that Black disabled adults face more barriers to accessibility more than all other ethnic groups, and that Black disabled people have the most trouble accessing the support services they need, resulting in poorer life outcomes across the board. People from ethnic minority groups continue to be more likely to report being in poorer health and to report poorer experiences of using health services than their white counterparts, King's Fund 2021. The national data in 2008 identified they have a gap when it comes to staff disability data and BME disabled staff data. The Workplace Race Equality Standards NHS data, published 2021 for the year 2020, doesn't specifically identify disabled BME staff, but does identify BME staff across level of seniority and career progression and complaints of racism, which highlights that compared to their white peers, these are continuing issues for BME staff in the NHS that still needs attention for improvement. So we have long-standing health disparities, status quo of institutional racism, recycling in healthcare, on a foundation of crushing funding cuts over the 10 years of Tory government leading the country. Next slide, please. As an occupational therapy student, it is interesting to note that occupational therapy is a profession which has been constructed from white Western philosophy, and at the same time, professes to be based upon social justice, inclusion, and person-centeredness. This seems to be a bit of a conflict. In September 2020, when I returned to university after maternity leave, I decided to get involved in groups that desire to change inequity in health and social care education, especially allied health professions, AHP education, by becoming an active member of the AHP students and lecturers affinity group called Race G, known as the Race and Cultural Equity Group. Also, the AHP Placement Anti-Racism and Anti-Discrimination subgroup, where we scrutinize and revisit policies. These are led by two visionary leaders, Thomas Ince and Mushrat Ahmed Landayu. Furthermore, I am also a proud member of BAME OT UK, which is co-founded by Mushrat, a pressure group to change the white supremacist domination of occupational therapy. This is important as it is about the experiences of BME students and eventually staff in the profession and their intersectional identities, which also includes disability to promote equity. The reason we need diversity in staff groups in the NHS is because these groups are better able to be responsive to the diversity of the public they will be serving. Also, these teams are better in being creative and innovative, highly motivated, and have better job satisfaction. This is reflected in a paper in Harvard Business Review 2016, titled "Why Diverse Teams Are Smarter." Having authentically diverse employee populations in the workplace increases the collective intellectual potential for better innovation. It keeps biases in check and makes a more happier and productive workforce, because the organizational culture is about inclusivity and fairness, and that comes from the top, the leadership and the board, with measures in place for accountability and governance checking. If we embed this in healthcare, the people that will benefit are the service users, the public, no matter their disability, cultural heritage, their nationality, gender, socioeconomic status, and so on. The service will be ready to meet their individualized needs which leads to a happy public receiving equitable care. If we build this type of organization, then we are going to reduce incidents of ableism and racism in delivering healthcare to the public, because justice and equity is priority and embedded in the organization. As an occupational therapist, soon to be in the workforce, this is the kind of organization I want to work in, when the structures, policies, procedures, and practices enable me to have a just and equitable career, and the public I serve receive just and fair service regardless of their disability, ethnicity, or nationality. If we step away from humanity, human rights, then we continue to show to Black and minoritized people that they are lesser human to a white person. That if you are not white, your career aspirations have a cutoff point. And if you are a BME service user, you may die. And that's just the risk we take for being a person of ethnicity. Do we as the human race want to accept this? Next slide, please. This quote is by the late Indira Gandhi, the ex-Prime Minister of India. Every transformative change results from turbulence and creates turbulence to deeply shake things up. Anti-ableist and anti-racist change actions are more than diversity and inclusion. It is the sustainable move to justice and equity. Next slide, please. If the system keeps telling you that you are imagining injustice and interpreting your own lived experiences wrongly, you are bound to mistrust it, disengage, feel less safe day after day. It's the perfect recipe for societies to regress rather than progress. This quote is by Dr. Nizrin Alwan. Dr. Alwan is an associate professor in public health at the University of Southampton and a Twitter influencer. Dr. Alwan's quote sums up accurately that it is fundamental for authentic equity progress and to embed social justice throughout healthcare. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Sherelle. Well done. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. Very interesting and some very inspiring quotations that you've shared with everybody. I can't see any, I don't know if there's any questions on here for Sherelle in particular, but there is one question that I would like to ask you that's on here. What do you think that we can do as individuals, and certainly in your profession, you know, what do you think can be done? I know you talked about some of the networks that you've been involved in and got engaged in, but is there something as individuals that you and other people within your profession can do?
So at the moment in the groups that I'm in, especially the AHP, anti-racist, anti-discrimination subgroup that I'm in at the university, we're discussing actually incorporating allyship training, as well as training that revolves around cultural humility. Because the thing is, if you have a white allied health professional who is racist and doesn't actually check their biases, because you have bias training, we have cultural competency training, and these are all tick boxing exercises or trainings, it doesn't work. So it's important for it to be more of a rolling program. Just like as allied health professionals, we actually would have basic life support or manual handling, and we have that as a refresher every year or so. So that's the same thing that needs to be embedded with these kind of anti-racist or anti-ableist training, where it's something that keeps going on. It's not something that stops and you just tick it and say, yes, I've got it, or I'm not racist. We need more to be incorporated in the actual curriculum as well for students. It needs to be decolonized because of course it's coming from a Western philosophy. And that also is the problem why, you know, service users such as Candy as well, who are experiencing racism and not receiving the actual care that they need.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So I'm very much, oh, somebody's put a question here. Cheryl, what changes do you want to see in occupational therapy education in particular? So other than just being decolonized, is there something in particular that you would like to see change?
Well, for me, I would say that my cohort is always predominantly white, and I'm talking back from before I deferred for maternity leave and now coming back from maternity leave. I mean, it's a little bit better than my first cohort, but that in itself is a problem because straight away you come to the classroom, it's segregated. You've got blacks here, we've got whites there. And when Black students are speaking up, their contributions are overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have that thing where you actually end up caving into yourself, where you feel like your contribution is not valuable, so you don't speak up. And that's a problem. And we've got the problem of having lecturers who are also predominantly white too. So they're not even noticing the racism that's going on in the class. And even if they are, they're not bothered. So that in itself is, if you actually speak up and say, look, this is going on in class, you'll be told that it's all in your head, or it's not happening, or you'll be classed as a troublemaker. So what a lot of Black students are doing who actually experience racism is just going through the course quietly, taking in all these traumatic experiences just to pass and get out of the university, which is extremely sad, but that is the big reality that we're facing. So I would like to see more representation of staff or lecturers of ethnicity in the university actually teaching occupational therapy. And I think for mentoring to be put in place for students of ethnicity, because we go through a lot, not just in class, but also on placement, when you have a practice educator who is white and probably racist as well, you have to go through that on your own, because we've seen through a lot of research and a lot of evidence where people have spoken up and said that they don't have the support from the university. So that in itself is a problem, because either people just withdraw from the course altogether, or they continue their career not happy, So I'd like to see that change, to be honest. I think if that was incorporated, it would really, really help.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sherelle. If we can just put everybody back on the screen, thank you very much. So we can get some final comments and to prove that everybody is still here. Thank you so much, Sherelle. Anyway, thank you very much for your presentation and for answering those questions. I really appreciate it, and I apologize that we overran. So yeah, everyone's here. Okay, then. So I'm just going to go around and ask all of our speakers if there's, if their final thoughts and final comments. And I'm going to start with, if you don't mind, Sherelle, if I start with you, since you were the last speaker, if you're quite happy to share any final thoughts or comments about the topic we've been talking about in terms of the idea of being, or the fact of being disabled and Black, and how that, multiple discriminations and, the intersection between being disabled and Black and maybe being a woman and all sorts of other things that we're talking about.
So I'd like to say first off, Candy, just well done for actually sharing your story, because I've never heard of that condition. And I know that you were also nervous about doing it, but it didn't show at all. You were just
thank you.
beautifully explained that to everybody, and we were able to actually experience in a way what you were talking about. And I'm really sorry that you actually received that kind of service from healthcare professionals who are supposed to be competent enough to do their job. So thank you for that. And thank you so much, Professor Gus, for shedding light on the disparities in healthcare and the racial discrimination that people actually face due to being Black and having a disability or a chronic illness. So I'd just like to say thank you for that. But for my take on everything, I think I've really learnt a lot about people who have invisible disabilities or illnesses. Because, like Fiona mentioned, Candy, when we look at you, we don't see any of the things you're speaking about. It's like a completely different person. And I think it's important that all of us actually realize that we need to, we need to actually just try and noticed that not everybody's disability or illness shows. So we have to be mindful of that. So when you speak, as an occupational therapist myself, I would like to look at my clients and patients and try and take into consideration what they're saying, because maybe their symptoms might not show physically. So when I'm planning interventions, I need to be more aware of that. So I think that was my take from all of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Sherelle.
Sherelle. Sorry.
No,
Well,
I was gonna
Candy,
say
you're going to be
thank
the
you,
next
it's
speaker
lovely.
as well. So go on.
No, I just want to say, yeah, thank you to everybody. Thank you for making me feel comfortable. I'm glad you can take something from this, Sherelle. You know, I think it is important, but yeah, that's it from me.
Will you do it again, Candy, do you think? Will you speak again?
Maybe. I might give it a go. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, you will. That's the one with me. Yes, you will. Anyway.
You should. You should.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for making it easier. And thank you, Gus. You know, always appreciated. And
Thank you so much.
thank you to Monica as well for being here. You know, hopefully you drew in another audience for us. So appreciate that as well. And thanks, Mum, as usual.
Okay, thank you very much. Luckily, you're not in the same room. We actually were going to be in the same room, but we were worried about feedback. So we're actually in different, she's at her house and I'm at mine. But thank you very much, Candy. So Gus, have you got some final thoughts or comments?
Yes, I mean, just to sort of go back to where I started in this conversation, you know, I believe that it is really so important for us to understand what I dubbed as the hegemony of normal and the way we assault people with that. Just an anecdote, when I was thankfully much younger, I had an argument with a rotary lawnmower and it went off with half of my foot. And I had to learn to walk all over again. And I put down my crutches too soon and was falling all over the place, knocking people about on trains, on escalators and everything else. I can't tell you the amount of abuse I had, because it wasn't only that, you know, there was somebody rocking around the place, etc. I was accused of being drunk at 9 o'clock in the morning, going to Euston Station. I was accused of not being responsible enough to get a job because of when people saw me walking around during the day and so on and so forth. It was utterly amazing. The fact that we do not allow for difference. We do not allow for people to be in their wholeness, like Candy, irrespective of the particular condition they might have. It is oppressive, and when it gets combined with attitudes people have towards race, you have a double whammy. You've got your condition to deal with, and then you've got the reactions of some nasty racist people on top of all of that, which is why I said towards the end of my talk, it is absolutely important that the schooling and education system understands all of that and understands that you know, racism is not just something to do with some bad people who have a nasty disposition. It is endemic within the society, and people draw upon it whenever it suits them to express whatever it is, particularly pejorative and negative attitudes towards others. So I started by, if you like, enunciating those various beliefs about our rights and our rights as human beings and the rest of it. And that's got to be seen to operate across society, especially in schools and educational institutions and so on and so forth, because the absence of that means you are actually diminishing people, and you're trying to make them feel that they are less than they are and less than they could be. So we all have a responsibility to ensure, especially able-bodied people, that we are not implicated in disability discrimination or marginalization in the same way as white people have got to ensure that they are not implicated in racial discrimination and exclusion.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'd like to, because I know we're running over time, so I'd like to thank all of our guest speakers, Candy, Gus, Sherelle. I'd also like to thank Fiona and Kosa for their help and support, their dedication and commitment to helping with all of these events. Fiona, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
Just to say, and thank you everybody for sharing and enlightening. It's always an education and a joy, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd also like to say thank you to Monica for managing to keep up with us and for staying the extra 10-15 minutes. I truly appreciate it. So thank you, Monica. And last but not least, I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today. Hopefully we've all learned something new and taken on board some or all of what we've heard today. And perhaps some of you will actually, look into how you can actually support Black people with disabilities or long-term chronic illnesses, so that they can actually share, their real and authentic experiences, their real and authentic lives and selves, as well as their anxieties. But most importantly, they can actually share their hopes and dreams, because whilst we talk about, I think I started about this, often being a negative and not always seen as a positive thing, it is a wonderful thing to be young, gifted and disabled. And hopefully Candy has been an example of that. I'll take some.
Can I say one thing, Mom, while you've
Yes,
just brought up, is if you can, it'd be great if people would donate blood, because
and plasma.
it helps me.
Yeah, that's
Plasma,
right. Yeah.
Things like that, it will help the Black community massively. So if you're not scared of needles, if you can, bite the bullet, I would definitely recommend it, please.
No, well done for that. Yeah, because that will help people with the sickle cell and whatever. There's lots of
Yes.
conditions. Well, this is one event. I'm sure we're going to do another one, Candy, where you'll be the star of the show. So, and hopefully Sherelle and Gus and others will join us. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Monica. So,
Thank you, Annette.
yes, yeah, thank you, Gus.
Thank
Can
you,
all the
Annette.
Thank you. Can all the speakers and Monica, can you stay on just for a moment? Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Trying times all the time. Destruction of minds, bodies, and